ICQ Podcast episode 262, Upgrading Your Next Radio. Well, hello everyone and welcome to this, our 262nd episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported by our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin M1MRB W9ICQ is joined by Chris Mike 0 Tango Charlie Hotel, Dan Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, and Ed DD5 Lima Papa to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BOY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is a feature on upgrading to your next radio. Well, as always, we'd like to thank the donors who help keep the show advert-free, and it's the monthly and annual subscription donors that we're thanking this episode. Please, guys, consider us either setting up a donation on a regular basis or a one-off donation by visiting www.icqpodcast.com/donate. We'd also like to make a PR mention here and thank you to our fellow friend and podcaster Bill Barnes, November 3, Juliet India X-Ray, who sponsored the Pennsylvania QSO Award in the name of the ICQ podcast. So we're going to pop a link to that on the show page, and so you can check out the award there that's been sponsored in all of our behalf to hopefully help promote the show. Well, now we join Martin, Chris, Dan and Ed as they discuss latest amateur radio news, including Nigeria working towards the 6 metre ban and reduced power in Sweden. I hope you enjoy.
Well, hi everybody and welcome to episode 262 of the ICQ News Roundtable. Tonight I'm joined by Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH.
Good evening, Martin. How are you?
Hi, Chris. No problems at all. I'm doing fine. I spent the weekend with you and Monday, so I think it's about third or fourth time in a row we've been together.
It is, yeah.
Also, Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU is with us from the States. Hi, Dan.
Hi, guys.
Yeah, good to have you with us, Dan, and looking forward to some of your comments on some of these news stories. I think we'll have some fun. And Mr. Ed Durrant DD5LP. Hi, Ed.
Yeah, hi all.
You've looked at some of these news stories as well, and I think we'll have some fun. Unfortunately, Mr. Rothwell, Martin Rothwell, M0SGL, isn't with us this episode. The reason I say this is for no other reason than he had to work late tonight. But Chris, we were at his wedding on Saturday, weren't we?
We were. I've got the music here. There we go. So, congratulations, our first ICQ podcast wedding. The weekends, let's type down now. Martin got married to Emma. That's you've heard in our jingle. So, Martin and Emma, congratulations. Martin and I were there, and it was great. So, from all of us, congratulations on the wedding.
Yep, certainly was. And there are pictures on Facebook, aren't there, of certain people like myself and Martin in penguin suits.
There certainly are, yes.
Yeah, but very, very good time was had by all. And as I say, congratulations to Martin and Emma. And I'm sure the rest of the team feel the same way. Moving on, our first news story is Nigeria Amateur Radio Draft Authorization Framework. Now, this was kind of a bit strange because, as Ed was suggesting, a newspaper reporter has kind of mixed up two news stories in one. And Dan and I were looking at this earlier in the week thinking, how many people in Africa are actually going to work on 60 gigs? But, yeah, I mean, how many people worldwide amateurs are going to actually play on 60 gig? But, okay, it's there, but there was two things rolled together, wasn't there, Ed?
Yeah, that's the way I've looked into it. The Vanguard newspaper in Nigeria, the reporters obviously got two announcements from the Nigerian Communications Commission and somehow mixed the two up. One was simply saying that to support development and experimentation, they were going to open up a band at 60 gigahertz where it would be license free, so that developments, for example, with 5G and other things, could happen there, so that technology has somewhere to work. And then at the same time, there's a draft document out about how they wish to regulate amateur radio in Nigeria to bring it more in line with a lot of other countries. And this reporter managed to mix the two up to say that the amateurs are going to get 60 gigahertz.
Yeah, it was quite interesting. Dan, your thoughts on this one? Did we get it right?
It looks like it. I've been looking over the draft for the amateur radio framework, and it does look like a rough draft, right? they have a bit in there about having to pass a Morse code test, for example.
Yeah, well, at least they got. Well, I think it contradicts it because one part says they're going to do Morse, and another part says they're not, doesn't it?
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't see the part that they said not, but
the ITU guidelines specifically excludes Morse tests.
Oh, okay, that's it then.
And since whatever year it was, and they're saying that one of the conditions is you have to conform to what's required from the ITU guidelines, and then it says you also have to pass a written test and a Morse test. It's very much a draft document. There's a certain amount of work to be done on that yet, I think. But it's interesting they're going for a 3-level novice, intermediate, and full license kind of model, similar to a lot of other countries now.
Yeah, certainly. Chris, I mean, this is the documents on this are all in English, so which surprised me initially, and then Ed said, well, he thinks English is the first language for the government out in Nigeria. So, what do you think?
Yeah, it is interesting. That's it's not really clear looking at the document. Obviously, what the change is, whether this is something new, whether this is something that's been. There is I believe, a national society in Nigeria, so I assume it's been around for a while as amateur radio. But it's not clear what the change is, what's the current position, and what is it they're proposing. So, I mean, it's good that they, as Ed was saying, they're looking at a 3-tier system, so they're similar to what we've got in the US and here in the UK. And I think, like you've been saying, it just requires a little bit of tidying up. But it looks like generally it looks fairly sensible, really.
Yeah. Well, as I say, any draft document obviously will end up with changes, and it's quite interesting what you were saying about Morse and do we do it, do we not? I believe in the UK that Ofcom don't really care one way or the other whether we do the Morse. It's the people that set the exams that have always wanted Morse in there, or the Morse appreciation. So, we could technically drop the Morse from our examination as far as Ofcom are concerned, and Ofcom wouldn't worry too much about it. I assume, but because we didn't have to do any Morse appreciation, that'd be the same in the States there, Dan, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, how does it cover it in the UK then? Is it just the fact that that's a mode that's possible and it's historical, along with more the modern digital and your phone modes and things, or does it go deeper than that? What people have to learn in the UK, because since it's been removed as a requirement to do the Morse test, it is actually amateur radio, not amateur radio telegraphy.
Yeah, but there was a discussion had the other year, and Morse is just an appreciation in the UK. And let's be honest, if you can tell the difference between a dit and a dart at any speed, and the emphasis is at any speed, you pass. Now, that might mean the only way you can fail is not turning up. So what they were actually saying is that, they could at any point in time decide not to do Morse and do something else like FT8 or PSK31 or whatever. It doesn't have to be Morse. It always has been. And, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I understand, it doesn't have to be Morse.
And I think this comes along to the fact of standardisation as well, which is going to come up in 2 more items we're coming up with. The Herick agreement, or the definition of what's required of a radio amateur, is actually a European standard document, but each individual country can add to that. And in some cases, it's not the licensing authority that add to it, but it's the radio society that think, oh, we'd like our people to know about this as well, therefore it's going in the exam. And, to make sure they get a good start into the hobby. But the base requirement, I said we're covered in another couple of items in the news, is this Herick list of basic requirements. And as far as I know, there's nothing in there about Morse.
Yeah. So all in all, interesting document, and we'll have to see. And we went a little bit off on topic on the Morse, but we'll have to see what's going to happen. Moving on, 2018 State of Amateur Radio Survey. Dustin Thomas, N8RMA, is now conducting his second survey on the state of amateur radio. Now, I looked at his results from his 2017 one, and interesting results. How scientifically, don't know, but at least the guy's making an effort, isn't he, Dan?
Oh, yeah, I have to congratulate him for that. There's been talk of getting the ARRL to do that here for a long time, and they just haven't picked up the ball on that yet. But yeah, this isn't really that scientific, but hey, interesting stuff to look at.
Yeah, and we found a few interesting ones that made us smile. There was one where our spouses in amateur radio, and I think it was something like 78% no, 15% yes, and something like, and I'm not looking at it, so I'm guessing the numbers now, but it was something like 7% only when I have to, which rather amused me.
No, that was the large portion. Was the only when I have to?
Was
like
it
70%, not 17? Yeah.
Not looking at it now. No, it was 78%.
78%. Only when I have to get involved.
No, it was 78%.
No? Oh, no was 78%. Okay, sorry.
Yeah. It was the small percentage, or only when I had to. But there's other things. You've just done the 2018 test, haven't you, Ed? So what do you think on the 2018 information you've given them?
Several of the questions in there are US, FCC, ARRL specific, although you can interpret them for your own country, of course. I think it's great that he's doing this and that he publishes the things afterwards. Whether that really is going to change anything, I don't know, but it's interesting anyway. There's questions in there like, do you think the problem with the hobby is too many young people that don't know Morse? Or two separate questions there. Or too many old people and this sort of thing, which is probably not going to give you any real value in the results. It's just going to stir people up, but at least they'll go on to the next question then, I suppose. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the results are this time compared to last year, and I think that's going to be the biggest value, to see if people's attitudes and any of the points are changing.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because if he's used the very similar questions to last year, it'll be nice to see if things have changed. If you come up with new questions, then there's no historical data. And
it's basically the same questions as last year, with I think maybe 2 or 3 additional ones.
Yeah. But then again, just because somebody's of a certain age doesn't mean to say that they have old ideas. I mean, I've been accused, certainly by Mr. Rothwell and his lovely new wife, of not growing up yet in a nice way. So, how old people are is probably an irrelevant question. It's how old is their state of mind, I would suggest. But, Chris, what do you think?
I think it's a very, very interesting survey, actually. I've just been filling it actually for next year. It's got, I think some of the questions are quite interesting, and certainly some of the responses are, like you said, there's a few in there that are tongue-in-cheek. But no, I think it's actually quite, it tells you things like what people think of the issues facing the hobby, the general things like, how old people are and those sorts of things. And there's lots and lots actually of things on there. Things like how do you do QSL? Do you use digital? Do you use, online like EQSL or Log of the World? Or do you go with the paper QSL cards and go through a bureau? Lots of things on there that are a bit contentious. Things like, do you like contesting, for example? So it's quite. It's actually. I think it's actually got some good questions actually. I don't know whether it's the same questions for this year, but I think obviously the person's thought about it, and I think the results are quite interesting. Like you say, maybe not that scientific, because obviously you choose to do this. It's not as if, and people I guess could perhaps, I don't know, to perhaps do more than once, for example. But certainly interesting, and it sounds like they've had a good response. So we had a good response last year. So I guess we can publish the link there, Martin, in the show notes.
Yeah, we certainly will, Chris. And I think what I'd urge each and our listeners to do is pop over to our website, pick up the link for this, and have a go at filling it in. It shouldn't take you too long. If this gentleman's bothered to find out about our hobby, then it's probably worth us all going over and filling it in and making an effort there. So, please have a go at filling it in.
Yeah, and the more people that do fill it in, the more accurate the results are going to be.
That's true. That's very true. Okay, moving on. This is really a UK-centric thing, but it proves us amateurs get involved in a lot of other things. Veteran long-distance walker is going to use 2 meters on his latest walk. The gentleman is a 59-year-old, so he's not a young chicken. He's younger than me, though. Mr. Paul Tunswell, M3WHO, is going to do another long walk through the UK. He's got booked to do a 900-mile walk, and he's going to be communicating with his backup person on this one, Mr. Richard Newstead, G3CWI, and Richard's going to help him along the way. So I think it's really good. The charity he's doing this walk for is Fibromyalgia, I think, Action UK. Chris, you looked up at this and you think you know somebody's got this.
It's fibromyalgia, and it's not so nice condition. It causes a lot of pain throughout the body and tiredness and that sort of thing. So it's a good charity that he's chosen there. And Richard, I believe, is the person that runs Soda Beams. So it's nice to see him. He's not promoting Soda Beams as part of this sponsorship, but I think it's him doing it personally. But it's nice to see Richard involved in helping out this chap with his walk and keeping him safe, using his motorhome, I believe, and over 2 meters, on the radio there. So I think he's got a long walk. It's a significant 18.5 miles a day. Is not a short amount of walking each day. So he's obviously got quite fit. He's quite a fit chap, and he's done it before, I believe. So he'll be busy from the 1st of April, so not too far away. And listen out for him, and I'll put a link in there as well to his Just Giving page, so you can, if he wants to make a donation, they can do.
Yeah, now I would say outside the UK, you probably won't be able to hear him because he's on 2 meters. But Dan, what do you think of somebody doing this sort of thing?
Oh, I love this. He could promote this worldwide if he can get on Echolink or IRLP or something. I'd love to talk to this guy via Echolink.
Well, there's an option there.
I'm gonna email him and ask him if he can ever hit an Echolink to hit our node.
Why not? That would certainly get him some worldwide coverage, wouldn't it? So
yeah,
that's good. Yeah, Ed, what's your thoughts on this one?
Okay, yeah, well, Paul Truswell, M3WHO, actually last year did a long walk from Lowestoft to Land's End, which is basically from the east to the west, easternmost to the westernmost points in the UK, and he's now going from Dover up to Cape Wrath, which is basically south to north. And the very last part of that is the most dangerous part over the Highlands of Scotland, and that's where Richard's going to be helping him. And the 2 meter radio there is for communications back to Richard in the first line, I believe. I'm sure he'd be happy if he got more contacts. I don't know of any repeaters up in that area of the northwest of Scotland. I could be wrong, but of course he's going to be spending 50 days going through the whole of England up to Scotland, at which point he certainly will be passing a lot of repeaters. And Dan, if you drop him an email, maybe you can set up a sked with him at some point to work him through one of the Echolink repeaters on the way up, or the IRLP.
Yeah, I think that'd be very cool.
Yeah, it would be, Dan. And if you do manage to work the gentleman, because you're more likely to work yourself than one of us UKites, hopefully you can record it and we'll play out your QSO with him. I think that'd be really good. Yeah. Moving on here, we had a next news story. ERA, which is Ireland, ERA Ham Radio Examination Report released. And this is the 2018 version, the IRTS License Examination Board in Ireland produced this document. It's a really, really interesting PDF file, and it shows the areas where the students are having trouble and which questions are giving them the most difficulty to understand. It's got quite a bit of interesting bits and pieces in there and could be used as a framework for writing your own course almost. And there's also a 60-question examination at the end, mock examination, which I thought was very interesting when I did it. I did the version this some years ago, and I didn't get 100%, but equally, you have to work on the principle. I wasn't sitting there with all the Irish licensing regs, but I thought it was very interesting. And Ed, you seem to think this is pretty much the Herick information, didn't you?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to say, can you add in the link to where the report is in the show notes so people can have a read of it?
Yeah,
we have got a link here about a guide actually from the IRTS for studying for the Herick exam. So the Irish amateurs only actually have the full license class. They don't have a 3-level structure. And the study guide or the information about Herick is actually very well written. So that link there is worth a read. And as I say, the Herick is something that comes from the CEPT, which is the Europe-wide regulator, if you like, on licensing. And individual countries then add their own things to that, such as differences in their regulations. So, all in all, handy guide anyway for anybody in Europe, because most European licenses are started to be based on the Herick standards.
Yeah.
Oh, the other thing in here, they did make one comment in the article as well, that the Irish exam is a single 60-question exam, which is different from other countries where you actually sometimes have multiple exams for different levels of license and also practical assessments, where this is purely a 60-question exam. But I'm sure that doesn't make it any easier.
No, looking at the mock test, it did look quite interesting. And Dan, I thought you'd be interested in this because you might write study guides, and there was some good information in this PDF file, wasn't there?
Oh yeah, I like it a lot. I'm looking at the section right now where they mention the problem areas, areas where students failed the test. That would be actually very interesting for me to know, since I teach classes. And then there's an online course too, which is not a part of this PDF, but there's a link to it from the PDF. And that's quite an interesting thing too. A lot of work went into that.
Yeah, they certainly have done a lot of work, as you say, on this one. Chris, we train, and we've got a few students at the moment. I wouldn't suggest we show our students this because we have to run to the syllabus, but I think it's a great bit of work.
I agree. I think it's really good. It's got a sample paper in there with 60 questions. I'm looking at them, and yeah, some of these I'll struggle with, to be honest with you. But it's very well written. It's got all the answers there for the sample questions and things. Lots of information. I mean, pretty much everything's there. If you want to do the exam, that would be your Bible. Obviously, it's kind of covering the syllabus, and it's got some other, lots of it. At the end, it's got some appendices that kind of cover off lots of other things as well. As Dan was saying, the areas that people have struggled a little bit, and that can help you to perhaps focus on those to make sure that you get there. And it's got things like how to prepare for the exam and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I think it's a very interesting read. And good luck to anybody that might want to take the Irish exam, a certain perhaps member of the podcast.
Yeah. Well, Dan, not Dan. Sorry, I'm blaming you for this one, Dan. No, Bill gave Bill gave Colin a bit of a G up last episode, so I think Colin will do it at some point in time in the near future. As I say, he was over at the weekend, and I know he enjoys being with us and operating and the whole thing when he is in the UK. It'd just be nice for him to get on board out there. And I'm actually sending an HF rig out to Ireland, so there will be an HF rig out there, and he'll be able to listen even if he isn't allowed to transmit. So hopefully he'll get the bug. Moving on. Oh, this is a sad story in many ways. Trevor Baylis, the gentleman who invented the Windup Radio, has just died at the age of 80. And I've got to say, when they first talked about a wind-up radio, I thought this was an April Fool. And it isn't. I thought it was. I thought, somebody's going to now say it's a steam-powered radio and all those sort of things. But Trevor designed the wind-up radio to help people in the third world countries where there weren't electricity. So, places, some of the African countries and that. And unfortunately, he's no longer with us. Chris, I mean, I haven't got one of his wind-up radios, but interesting guy what he did, isn't he?
Absolutely, and I'd never had one, but I've certainly seen them. And certainly, I think his vision was to be able to have people in parts of the world, for example, in Africa, where there's not great availability of batteries and things, to be able to use radio. So having a wind-up radio, I think, was a genius idea. It's pretty much self-sufficient, isn't it? You can wind a handle for 20 seconds, you can get an hour's worth of apparently you can get an hour's worth of radio out of it. So I can imagine that being really useful in those parts of the world. So yeah, and I think he also later on in his career, because he did get he got an OB, didn't he, and a CB, I think, over the years from the Queen. And I believe he was involved in protection, because I think there was a few issues around patents and things, I think, around what he created. And I think he then moved into more around things like how to help people to protect their ideas. Because almost he pretty much was an inventor. I don't think he was in it for the money. I think he was in it. He actually had a vision about how to help people. So it's sad that he's passed away, and he's got a good legacy behind him.
Yeah, certainly has, Chris. Certainly has. Dan, I was checking with you earlier, but you had these wind-up radios in the States?
Yeah, they were advertised. I never owned one myself, not one of these Baylis ones, but I actually do have a wind-up radio now. And they were marketed as, emergency kind of radios, and I don't know, it works pretty well.
Yeah. Well, I never got the wind-up radio. I ended up with a wind-up torch, or a torch with it was an LED torch with a generator in it that charged a big capacitor. And you get about 5 minutes out of the torch, which was quite useful because you could leave it in your toolbox. But similar principle to the wind-up radio. Ed, what do you think?
I had something very similar to you, Martin. Wind-up torch, but also had an FM radio built in and a USB charging port for the phone. And but these ones from Trevor Baylis, I think, were shortwave, weren't they? So I guess in some ways, as the shortwave stations all die away, the usefulness of these radios in Africa might die away as well. But I think he was quite upset at the fact that somebody stole his idea and made commercial gain out of it, which is why he then moved into the second field that Chris mentioned of helping people protect their, not experiments, their inventions. That's the word I'm looking for. And he got the OBE, the Order of the British Empire, in 1997. And became a commander of the British Empire in 2015, the first one for the wind-up radio and the second one for his work in protecting inventions. So, and he set up a company in South Africa and actually used disabled workers to manufacture the wind-up radio.
Yeah.
A great loss.
Yeah, he'll be sadly missed. I mean, not an amateur, not one of us as radio amateurs, but somebody who has actually put back into radio in general and taken radio to the masses in some ways. If you're in a third world country where you haven't got electricity, one of these radios certainly would have helped. So, sadly missed.
Yeah, he wasn't a radio amateur, but he actually was an honorary member of the RSGB.
He was, yeah. Yeah, he's part of our fraternity.
Yeah.
Moving on, the Swedish regulator proposes ham radio power reduction. Back in 2017, amateurs were given a kilowatt in Sweden. Now they're being suggested that they're going to be put down to 200 watts, and it looks like they're also going to get the 60 meter band at, obviously it won't be at 200 watts, but, and they may have to pay the equivalent of $33 for their license, mightn't they, Ed?
Yeah, okay. First of all, they got the current regulations in 2016, so they've been around for a couple of years, and those currently in Sweden, there's no annual amateur license. That means they pass the Herick compatible exam, which is organised by the SSA, which is the Swedish Amateur Association. The call sign's issued, and it's free of charge for life. And as I said, at the moment, they can run up to a kilowatt output. But this is a proposal from the government or the regulator to change that output to 200 watts. The justification for that is that if they get interference, they believe that they're more likely to get interference from the high-powered stations, and with having those high-powered stations actually registered and knowing where they are and everything else, they're going to be able to go there and sort the interference out quicker than if the people, may have moved and haven't changed the address and all the rest of it, by the fact that they're having to pay an actual license to be able to use a kilowatt. They're also, keeping up to date with their registration and everything else at the same time. So the other thing I'd mention is it's maybe 1.5 S points at the most, difference between 200 watts out and a kilowatt out. So I wonder how many of the amateurs in Sweden actually run a kilowatt at the moment. I suspect not that many. Obviously, the contest stations and the like will pay the $33 US to keep their high power for the contest. But apart from that, I suspect there's not going to be a major impact of this change.
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, Dan, you're a Morse operator. 200 watts on Morse should be more than sufficient to make it over to you. Do you work many Swedish stations?
I do actually work a fair amount of them. So that's not the power. I don't think is a problem. I'm interested in the whole rationale here. I mean, are they having a rash of interference from amateur radio stations there? I'm just always curious about these kind of rules changes that seem to come out of nowhere.
Well, it may just be that somebody's looked at them and wanted to bring them into line with other countries nearby. We don't know why they want to do it. As I say, it could be interference problems, but if you've got a good station set up properly with a kilowatt or 200 watts, it's not the power that's going to cause you interference, is it? It's a bad station set up.
Yeah. So I don't know. I'm always interested in the rationale behind these things. That's my cup of tea there.
Yeah, I understood. Chris, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm kind of with Dan, really. There must be a reason why they've decided to bring this in. Although, having just reread the story, $33 a year doesn't seem too bad. So if you had just gone out and spent a fortune on your linear, and then you find you can't use it, well, actually, $33 a year doesn't seem too bad to keep it going. So, I suppose, it's not the end of the world, is it? And yeah, they got 60 metres. Well, so certainly proposing to get 60, because these are all just proposals. That's not necessarily going to happen. But yeah, they're getting 60 metres, so that's good. So some more people to talk to on that band. As long as it's the same bit of that band that we've got here in the UK or elsewhere in the world, then that's good news.
Yeah, well, I think it's the WRC 15 they're talking about, or they're potentially looking at, which seems to be what most countries are going for. So that's looking good. Moving on. I like this one, and this is our last news story. I like this one. Pacific Ham Radio Drone KH6JF/MM is using FT8. And this is a drone that is out in the ocean. It looks from the pictures about the size of a surfboard. It, I believe, has a KX3 and a Raspberry Pi on it. And yeah, and you can track it on the website to see where it is. But I just kind of like this, that you if you're chasing grid squares, this one is got to be real fun. What do you think, Dan?
Oh yeah, this is very cool. I've never heard of this before. I never heard of these ocean going drones, and it's kind of amazing technology. In the links, there's some videos, and it'd be good to watch those videos just to see how these things work.
Yeah. So it's a terrific, interesting technology, and it obviously is quite robust. I mean, the picture of it looks as though, I first thought, will it survive? And then we now know that it survives some really serious storms, but it doesn't look that big. It could get a real sort of hammering from the environment.
Yeah.
Chris, what's your thoughts?
Well, absolutely. I can imagine that in the Pacific they're going to get a few storms, so these things must be pretty robust. So yeah, I believe it's called a wave glider. Looking at the website, is this vessel that they've got it mounted on, and I think the one we're using is from a company called Robotics that are part of Boeing who make aircraft. But yeah, it looks very interesting. It'd be nice to get one in the logbook, wouldn't it? You know, that little thing. It's running a KX3, I believe, is the transceiver on board, and it's talking about FT8, so it's all automated. And yeah, it'd be great to get your log, wouldn't it, to be able to say you've operated a kind of this kind of self-operating device in the sea, out in the ocean. I think that'd be a good one.
Yeah, well, I know Bill's working grid squares, Bill. So when you hear this one on Sunday, you'll know that it's out there. Its call sign is KH6JF/MM. So interesting. Ed, you did a lot of looking at this, and you said it's been around a little while, but it's an interesting one to see. It's going from Hawaii over to California, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the commercial vehicle, the Wave Glider, I believe, has been around 2 or 3 years, and it's used for ocean research. Part of Boeing actually manufactures these to commercial customers. And what we've got here is the fact that somebody's put some amateur radio gear on it while it does its trip from Hawaii over to California. Set off in December, and looks like it's about 3/4 of the way there now. So I'm guessing it's probably going to take another 6 weeks or so. And at the moment it would hit Mexico, but of course it uses the actual sea currents to propel itself along, so it doesn't go very fast. About 3 or 4 kilometers an hour, I think, or 3 or 4 miles per hour. Oh, knots per hour it would be, of course, because it's at sea. And the going up and down of the waves, it converts into forward motion through something that's hung underneath the boat, or the surfboard, if you like. And yeah, it looks really quite interesting. And when I first read drone, I went, how can it be maritime mobile when it's a drone? But obviously it's a robotic ship is what it is, or a small boat. And yeah, it's had contacts, I can see just looking through the last day or two, not only into North America, but also into Japan, New Zealand, Australia, and several Pacific islands as well. I guess the right time of day, a little better propagation. It might even get signals from in Europe to it at some point. So very interesting. And I think we were discussing this beforehand to say that we'd heard about this boat before, or we thought we had, but it had been running, we think, PSK, and it's because it's now running FT8, because that's the thing that a lot of people are interested in. It's becoming a real big success, and that combined with the ARRL starting their grid chase competition in January means that a lot of people will be looking to get a contact with this, because you ain't going to get a contact into those grid squares very often.
Yeah, well, I suppose you can have multiple contacts with it, because we do multiple grid squares, so that's another option there. And as I say, it does look quite a small device. I would imagine of a night time, if it actually got in the way of a ship, the ship wouldn't see it. It literally is about the size of a surfboard from what we can see on the video. But
on the website now for Liquid Robotics, so it's 3 meters long, so it is about the size of a surfboard, and it's got, as Ed was saying, 8 meters below it. It's tethered to another device which is 2.2 meters long, and that's kind of what, as the waves pass under the thing that's floating along, this thing underneath somehow tows it along. So yeah, I think, as I was saying, it's 1 to 3 knots, and it can go for up to a year. So you can just leave it and off it goes, and it'll eventually get where it's going to. Apparently, you can tow up to 0.5 ton, up to 500 kilograms mass. So that's pretty impressive, actually. So yeah, it's very clever technology.
Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of nice thing to end on, because it's interesting technology. This is new stuff. It takes into FT8. It talks about using a Raspberry Pi with a KX3, and it's just something different. And if you're working grid squares, this one's going to be a really good one for you. Okay. Well,
just one last point in there. We were talking before about why is this now a news item? I've just reread this. On March the 6th, FT8 was enabled. So prior to that, it was running some other digital mode. So You haven't missed that much, Dan. You've only missed a few days, so you've got a good chance of getting it on FT8 over the next few weeks, I guess.
Yeah, I'm going to have to give that a go.
Yeah, as I say, all interesting. Okay, that concludes the news stories. Right, guys, what have you been up to? I'll tell you what, let's start with Chris, because he normally goes last. Chris, what have you been up to?
Well, I've been off work for the last few weeks, but I have been on holiday. So I was out in Tenerife last week. So I've not actually done an awful lot, to be honest. I've not been doing an awful lot of radio. Things that I'm going to be doing, well, once again, Martin, you and I are going to be on HMS Belfast. And I believe we're planning to be there on the 24th of March, along with a few other guys. And we'll be putting the station on the air there, using the special event station they've got to commemorate the 80th. I think I mentioned it actually on the last podcast, but I'll repeat it again. It's the 80th anniversary of the launching of HMS Belfast. So it was launched on the 17th of March, 1938. So in fact, it's actually this weekend that they are having that actual 80th birthday. But until the end of May, there's a special event station that's being put on. And the call sign is GB80 GGCN. So that's GB as in UK. 80 years, and GGCN was the ship's original call sign. So that's the listen out for that one. I think it's going to be quite busy now. So I think we'll put that call out on the air. And obviously the people there operating that, probably every day now. But 24th of March, we'll be on the ship. If you want to work us, then listen out for us, and we'll be on HF. We'll be around there somewhere. And we'll probably also put something on the Facebook group as well, just to remind people that we're going to be there. So if they want to get in touch, we'll be on, I'd imagine we'll be running single sideband, so it'll be fun rather than Morse code. But yeah, if you want to call in, and we'll have a chat with you.
Yeah, well, I think there's quite a few of us going this time, so the Bridge Wireless office is going to be rather full, but there are quite a few of us going.
Do you guys have the job of going around the ship then after you've finished on the radio and change all the clocks?
No, thankfully not.
Because, of course, that is the night that you change the clocks.
I think you're right. I think it is, yeah.
24th to 25th.
In the UK, I think you were saying that's the case in
Central Europe as well.
Yeah, but it's not. I think you were saying earlier, I think, Dan, you were saying the clocks have already gone. They go forward at this time of year, so I think they've already gone forward, haven't they, in the States?
Yep, we changed them on Sunday.
So the time difference is that time of year now, where the time difference is all over the place. And I think you were saying, in Australia, it's different again?
Yeah, April the 1st they change, and then theirs go back, not forwards.
So yeah.
Because they're going into autumn.
Autumn, yeah. Fall, as they say in the States, but yeah.
Yeah. So Ed, what have you been up to?
Well, you remember from last show that I was on that I've got a new portable rig, the Chinese Xiegu X108G. Well, it's been out on the hills with me a few times. It's worked fine, but I've had problems with some of my portable antennas. So I've been repairing those or finding what's wrong with them or building new ones. And over the next few days, I'm going to be out. In fact, tomorrow I'm heading out to Sota Summit, and then about a week after, I'm going out again, trying to get out really early that time for contacts into Australia and New Zealand. So that's, Sota's been my big thing over the last 4 weeks, including the fact that I was one of the 3 organisers of a special event on Sota we have twice a year, where we try to get out as many summits as we can around between Europe and Australia and New Zealand, basically. But this time we also had South Africa involved. We had Japan involved, and believe it or not, also somebody in Canada. And that went very well. That was on the 10th. So we ended up with 65 summits in 20 countries and 5 continents. And yeah, made some, despite the absolutely atrocious radio conditions, we actually made some contacts over those distances with QRP and simple antennas. So shows what can be done.
Yeah, well, we've always said the bands are only dead if people don't call on them, and sometimes they're open when you don't actually know it. So it sounds like you've had fun. Dan, what have you been up to radio-wise in the last month?
Well, I've been preparing to teach the one-day tech class at Dayton this year. I've been selected to teach the one-day tech class there, and getting information up on my website, and I've actually contacted several ham radio manufacturers, and they're going to be donating radios and other ham radio goodies. So we'll have a big show at Dayton.
Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds good.
Be fun.
Yeah, well, our young Colin is going to be out in the States in June, but he's going to New York, which is quite away from you. I think Bill said he's going to go over and see him, but New York's a bit of a way for you. But he was bending mine and probably Chris's ear at the wedding about Dayton, wasn't he?
It was.
How we ought to do it. So he says he's on a fact-finding mission, but we may get there one day, Dan.
Oh, you'll love it. You'll love it.
Yeah, I'm sure we would. As I say, we enjoyed the Frigates Haven and we enjoy the National Hamfest in the UK. So, yeah, we are planning at some point in time to come out to Dayton. And it is on my bucket list of things I want to do. So, must get in round to that.
So, one final one. So, just looking at Radcom that came through my door, I think yesterday, there is a nice April the 1st joke in there. If you can spot it on page 14 for those listeners that have got their members of the RSGB that got their Radcom, have a look out for that one. I'm not going to spoil it by reading it out now.
Yeah. Well, I hasten to add, I know some podcasts do their April Fool's joke, and Bill Mirror of Solar Smoke. Hi, Bill. I know you do one every year, you and Pete. But we consciously didn't do an April Fool's, so some of the news stories over the last few months have sounded a bit April Fools. We don't believe them to be April Fools. So,
Martin,
yeah,
there's still time.
There is still time, but I'm a good boy. But okay, what have we done? What have I done? Well, like Chris, I was at Martin Rothwell's wedding on Saturday, Martin and Emma, and that's been kind of kept us. Well, Martin and I fairly busy, more Martin than I, but it was an interesting one because it was a difficult one to do the speech. I was Martin's best man, and it kind of went something along the lines of, Emma said to Martin, have you written your speech yet? And he went, no, I'm a professional broadcaster, I'll just wing it. And she gave him the, no, you won't look. And then when I met her a few days later, she said, have you written a speech to me? And I went, no, I'll just wing it on the day. And she went, no, you won't. So anyway, I was planning at the wedding, but I decided better of it because it might have just tipped her over the top on the day. When I had a few bullet points which I worked off, but I was going to give her a blank sheet of paper and say, here's a copy of my speech, but that might not have gone down too well. Anyway, let's say congratulations to Martin and Emma, and let's say Martin will be back fairly soon. They've not gone away on honeymoon just yet, but they're going later in the year, so that's a good one. I've managed to buy myself a elk antenna. So, Chris, we have got your antenna you've been building, and I've bought one, so we should get that satellite contact in soon. But I really just think we're waiting for the warmer weather now. It's too damn cold to be outside.
Well, apparently, Martin, we've got some more snow coming at the weekends, so we're not quite over it just yet. We'll see.
Yeah,
and when you guys are ready with your satellite thing, let me know. Happy to join in as well if the pass is in the right place.
Yeah, no problems. As I say, yeah, we're going to do something, but as I say, it's still in the plan to do this before our 10th birthday. And I've been kind of listening to the satellites. My press ganged my old scanner into operation. I've only got a white stick collinear on it, but it's been scanning the FM satellites pretty much permanently. I did turn it off before we started recording because Murphy's Law would have dictated that it would have found half a dozen satellites while we were recording and made a hell of a noise. But been listening to that. And the only other real radio thing I've been doing, so I've got 3 students with Chris going through a foundation. Now, one of them is ready to take the exam. He's done a lot more work. And hopefully we'll have another foundation licensee on the air in the next 3 or 4 weeks, with the other 2 following fairly soon after. So that's what we've been up to. So I think we've all done a fair bit. I'd like to have done more radio when I was off, but unfortunately it wasn't very nice outside. So there you go. So I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU for joining me today.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Dan. I'd like to thank Mr. Ed Durrant DD5LP.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Ed. And Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH.
Yeah, cheers, guys. Another interesting little chat there, yeah.
73 all. We'll do it again soon.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BOY. And we start off with news here in the UK that Ofcom are starting to auction off some of the former amateur radio spectrum. It's about 40 megahertz of the 2.3 gigahertz band. And this is to auction off to the mobile phone companies to improve broadband services to mobile users. It's also releasing 150 megahertz of the 3.4 gigahertz band as well, to prepare for the rollout of future 5G services. Now, Ofcom are going to be starting that auction process very soon, later on this month. 5 companies have expressed an interest in bidding for the services. These include Airspan Spectrum Holdings Limited, EE, Hutchison 3G, Telefonica and Vodafone. So pretty much all the main players there in the UK mobile phone market will be bidding for that there. Delay came about because both 3 and EE both went to the UK High Court to appeal the auction process, but those appeals have been rejected. So it looks like we'll have some more mobile broadband in the what used to be the amateur radio spectrum in the UK very shortly. Good news in Tunisia now, where in Tunisia they're now starting to issue ham radio licenses, and the first batch have now been issued. These are after exams were taking place in the back half of last year, accumulating with an exam on the 20th of December after training started in September. Great news there that IARU Region 1 will be now receiving Tunisian amateur radio operators with their own licenses for their area. There's a contact book that will be available to all members of the group, and as I say, you'll be able to look up very soon people who have received their licenses there in Tunisia. So keep an ear out for anybody who, has a new call sign from Tunisia. And the continuing success of the ICOM D-Star repeater is shown here by their repeater GB7 India Charlie is now nearing a figure of 2,000 D-Star call sign registrations, which is the first of the D-Star repeaters ever to reach 2,000 registrations. Registrations were open on the repeater in April 2008, and as I say, it's taken nearly 10 years to reach that figure of 2,000 active people there. ICOM say that D-Star is the world's most popular digital amateur radio network and currently has 1,652 global repeaters. So certainly, lots of ways of making contact with people there. In the UK, there's currently 77 operational D-Star repeaters, and another 12 are licensed and coming online very, very soon. So D-Star continues its rollout. We'll put a link on the ICQ podcast website page, for any further information you might want to know about the D-Star system from ICOM. Well, now we head over to our features episode, and our feature is on upgrading to your next radio. I hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast.
Hi there, Chris Howard M0TCH here. Just thought I'd do a quick talk about buying your next radio. So, a lot of us in the hobby start off, and we're not quite sure if it's the right hobby for us, and we go out and we buy something to get us on the air, and that's certainly what I did. So when I got my foundation license a few years ago, I rushed out on the same day that I passed my exam, went out and bought my first radio, and I went out and bought a Yaesu FT817. Now, being a foundation license holder, I was only allowed to use at the time up to 10 watts on most of the bands. So thought, well, it's a 5-watt radio, that will do the job. So I went out, bought it, used it, and those of you that are not familiar with that particular rig, it works on HF, it works on VHF, it also works on UHF, so quite a good all-rounder. And I tended to use it mainly on VHF and UHF, use it by the local repeaters. I did try it on HF a few times, and to be honest, I was quite disappointed. Only having 5 watts, and at the time, a bit similar to now, really the conditions on HF were not brilliant. And only living at the time in a flat, not having much space for an aerial, it was fairly disappointing. I then got my intermediate license and decided to buy something with a little bit more power. So in the UK, an intermediate lets you run generally up to 50 watts on most of the bands on HF. So I went out and I bought a Kenwood radio. I bought a TS570, which was second-hand, bought it over the internet. And it arrived, and it was a great radio. It was fairly old, but for me it was perfect. It worked on HF, didn't work on any on 6 meter, didn't work on any of the other bands, just worked on the HF bands and did single sideband, and that's pretty much all I used it for. It would also do CW as well, and that served me well for a number of years. I then got my full license, and I used it for a while. That particular radio will do 100 watts, and it was good. It was quite simple to use, and it worked pretty well. But then I thought about, well, look, I'm now been in the hobby now for, I think at the time, about 6 or 7 years, and I thought, well, I really want to go and buy a nice, decent rig that's going to, let me move on in the hobby. But I was thinking, well, actually, what should I buy? How much money should I spend? What sort of things should I be looking at? Well, what is the difference between my radio that cost me, I think it was £400 second hand? Compared that to a radio that you go and buy new from a dealer that's going to cost you, over £1,000. What is it you get for your money? Because from what I could see, it was pretty much the same. So this talk's really about what is it you get for your money when you move on. So, example, right now in my shack, I've got 2 radios. I've got an FT-DX3000, which is a kind of mid-ranged Yaesu radio, does HF and 6 meters. And I've also got here a Yaesu FT857D, which does all bands, so does UHF, VHF and HF. And they're both 100 watt radios, but there's a big difference in price and a big difference in size. So an FT-DX3000 is 11 kilos or 22 pounds. It's a big radio. It's not the sort of thing you go out with postal with. It's very much a kind of shack-based radio. The FT857D is 2.1 kilos or 4.6 pounds. It's under a fifth of the weight. And from a price perspective, so the FT-DX3000, just checked on the internet, is in the UK £1,449. And the FT857, which is that much smaller radio, is £599. So it's less than half the price for the FT857. Now, they both got very similar specifications. In fact, the FT857 actually does more because it covers more bands. So what is it that you're getting for that extra money? It's obviously it's a bigger box. It's got more stuff in that box. What is it that you're getting for your money? What is in that box that's worth that more money? And that's kind of what I want to talk about really in this talk, in this feature. So, when I went out, when I looked to upgrade my radio, when I wanted to move on, when I thought I wanted to get a better radio, I was kind of looking around and trying to find sources of information. Now, one of the places I looked was in the magazines. Now we all get them. Well, I'm sure we all get magazines, things like Radcom and QST and Practical Wireless, and lots of other magazines out there. Lots of national societies produce magazines, and they're all full of adverts for rigs from the various dealers. And you'll see in there that the range of prices and sizes and fancy features that these rigs have got. But what the magazines don't do, when they do reviews of rigs, they never really give a comparison. This is one of the real frustrations that I have with magazine reviews for amateur radio. If you look at car magazines or hi-fi magazines, they'll give you an opinion. They'll say this particular hi-fi is better than this particular hi-fi for the price, or this car is better than this car for the price, and they'll give an opinion. Whereas what we tend to find with amateur radio magazines, they'll just tell you about the radio. They won't say, actually, this Kenwood's better than this Icon, or this Icon's better than this Yaesu, or whatever. They don't do that. They just give the facts. They'll just do independent tests and give you the facts. So that's not really that helpful if you're trying to figure out, well, actually, I'm looking at my price range is maybe, £1,500. What is it in that sort of range? Which is the best radio to buy? They're not going to help you with that. Now, there are some things you can look at. So there's a website from a company called Sherwood Engineering. Now Sherwood will put a link in the show notes for them. They actually do reviews and they actually look at receiver performance, and they will actually rank radios based on that performance. So actually that's one area to look at if that's what's important to you. And likewise, the website eham.net is quite useful. People do write reviews of their own equipment there and give an opinion. What I find about eham is it's quite like TripAdvisor. You find some people that will absolutely love a particular radio and give it 5 out of 5, and the same radio, others will give it 1 out of 5. And you've got to really try and read through a few of those reviews to get a good balanced idea about that particular radio. And I spent a lot of time when I looked to upgrade looking at eham and looking at people's views on things. But you're never going to get everyone liking everything. Based on, I suppose, based on their own experience and their own, what they use the radio for. Now, we all work in different ways. Some people do SSB, some people do Morse, and certain radios will have particular features that are geared perhaps more to one, slightly one more than the other. So there are things also to bear in mind. But yeah, back to that question. What is it then you get? What is it what value are we getting? When you're spending that much more money, what more do you get for that money? So actually, I'm going to sort of go through a few things here that I looked at when I was doing my research. So kind of categories I looked at, really, the main categories that I found were what a big area of difference is around operator convenience, the sorts of things that make your life easier as an amateur. Now, for some people, that's actually not what they want. They actually want a challenge. So that's an area of category of things. I'll go through that in a minute, a bit more about some of those features. Another big area that the higher-end rigs seem to have a lot more on is receiver features and receiver performance. And again, I'll go a bit more into that. And then another area is around transmitter features as well. So you get a few areas there to consider. So let's go through each of those. So from an operator convenience perspective, one of the things that the radio that I've got has, for example, is voice memories. In fact, I actually buy an option for it. I think it was about £60 to buy the module to go into the radio to do this. For example, if you're doing a contest, and you need to think about what you're going to use the radio for as to whether these features are important to you or not. So if you're a contester, if you want to have to sit there manually saying over the radio CQ, 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 etc., that can get quite tiresome after a while. If you can record that and press a button and it will actually do the radio, will do it for you, that's actually quite a useful feature. So that's one of the things I wanted. Although now I'm not particularly myself a contester, that's still a useful feature to have. And that was something for me that was reasonably important. One of the things you'll see in a lot of modern rigs is they'll have nice, big, fancy electronic displays with all kinds of graphics on them. Some of them, not all of them. And if that's the sort of thing that is important to you, then that's something to look at. Some now have touchscreen displays, which make things a little bit simpler. Rather than having to have various menus and buttons and things, they actually do it through a touchscreen. Again, if you're looking at simplicity, then that might be something to think about. And in fact, if that's something that's important to you, it might be worthwhile going along to a dealer and actually seeing the radio in operation, having a play with it, so you sort of sit in front of it and get used to it and kind of think, is this a thing I want to sit in front of for the next 10, 20 years as my radio? Alongside some of those fancy displays, you get things like band scopes and audio scopes, and they can be kind of useful. I think they're a little bit overplayed, the usefulness. So the band scope, yeah, you can see signals on there. And some of the radios, some of the lower end ones will only kind of do a sweep and then it will stay static on the screen. Some will do a continual sweep and show you on the screen whereabouts the activity is. So if you've got a strong signal, you can see straight away it's in a particular part of the band, and you can go and select it quite quickly. And that might be useful if you're someone that wants to do sort of does rag chewing and you're looking for a particular station that's on, that you've got a quiet band trying to see what the activity is. That can be a useful feature. Personally, I think it makes the radio look quite nice, but I don't actually think it's that important, to be honest. Having a radio that's got one, to be honest with you, I don't find it that useful a feature. But you may operate in a different way, and you might find that more useful. And likewise, what I actually find more interesting actually is the audio scope. And I tend to find this works quite well with the filtering features of the radio. So again, with my particular radio, you can see the received audio waveform. If you've got some interference, and I'll go on a little bit more later on into filtering, you can actually help you to adjust the filters to try to get rid of that interference. But I'll pick that up later on. If you're an operator that does a lot of Morse code, Then features like zero beating, so you can actually get exactly on the frequency that the person's operating on graphically, so it helps you to adjust the receiver frequency to get bang on the frequency the person's sending at. It's a nice feature. Some of the higher end radios now have things like CWD code, so you can actually see the Morse code that's being sent. My radio has got that, and it actually works quite well. And I'm someone that's trying to learn Morse code, and I think it's actually quite a useful feature. Although there is a school of thought saying, well, actually that's cheating, and actually it's not really going to help you to learn, because it's kind of a crutch to fall back on. But there's different schools of thought there. Likewise, there are features like being able to decode RTTY and PSK. So even doing data modes, you can see on the screen. If you just want to have a listen around, you're not too bothered about sending, although I believe the radio can send it, although personally I think it's probably quite hard work to use the controls on the radio to send PSK or RTTY. But it's built in, you don't need to plug it into a computer. You still can. In fact, that actually moves on to the next feature I want to talk about, which is connectivity. So a lot of the more basic radios still use serial connections, especially some of the older radios. It kind of depends when the radio was designed, how long it's been out for. But typically they have a serial connection. Now, of course, modern computers very rarely now come with a serial port, and you need to have various converters and things, and it can get quite messy with the number of cables that you've got and converter things and all that business. If you are wanting to connect your computer to a radio, some of the newer radios now come with USB connectivity, and that's fantastic. So my high-end or mid-range, I suppose, FTDX 3000 has a USB connection, and that is used to both control the frequency and the various other features. You can do rig control or cat control using that USB cable, and it's also a way of taking the audio in and out of the computer. So with one cable, I'm able to do data modes from the computer. It makes it much neater. You don't have to have an interface box between for example, with my FT857, I've got an interface box. I've got a signal link box that lets me connect it into the computer, but that's more wires, and having a USB connection eliminates that from your shack and actually makes things a bit neater. So that's something else that's a great feature. Other things like rotator control, so you can have rigs now that can control rotator and that sort of thing, and some that do things like satellite features that can do things like tracked adjust for things like Doppler shift, that sort of thing. So again, these are all features that by the way, I don't think Murray does that particular feature, but these are sort of things that could be useful. Again, depending on what it is that you want to do. So I guess in my case, after a few years, I sort of realised, well, actually, my probably main area of interest was HF. I do a little bit of VHF and UHF, but mainly what I do is HF. So I guess that moving on thing is about, well, actually, I think when we all start out in amateur radio, we want to do everything. We want to do data modes, we want to do satellites, we want to do digital modes, we want to do D-Star or DMR, we want to do slow scan TV, and after a while you kind of get to know the things that really interest you. And this is kind of part of that moving on thing, is about, well, actually, once you start to know what it is you actually want in a radio, then you sort of think about, well, maybe what it is that you might buy. Moving on to receiver features, and I think this is a big area for the sort of the higher end rigs. And I think to be honest, the more you pay, what you're paying for really is the quality of the receiver. So you've got those convenience features there, and you'll find actually some of the high end rigs don't have those features. Some of the what you're really paying for is the quality and the performance of the receiver. That's where your money's going. And that's really around, a lot of it's around filtering. So I mentioned earlier where you've got the audio scope. So what I found with this, my better radio, is that I've got much more, many more options around filtering what I receive. So for example, if you've got a very loud station next to a really quiet station, if you've got a lower end radio, you've probably not got many options on being able to pick up that lower station. Now, with a higher end radio, with the filtering features that you have, you can use that to kind of filter out the louder station and get a really selective, get a high selectivity to pick out that particular station. So things like DSP is useful to take out that background noise, and a lot of high-end rigs come with that now. Now, again, kind of moving a little bit from buying a new rig, if all you want to get out of a new radio is DSP, well, actually, you might need to buy a new radio. You can go out and BHI and other people sell DHP add-ins for what you might already have. You can buy a speaker from BHI that will give you DSP without having to buy a new rig, and that might be a much better value way of moving forward. So that's worth thinking about rather than having to buy a new radio. But certainly a lot of the high-end rigs now come with built-in DSP. Things like notch filters, being able to do IF shifts, lots of preamplifiers. So, for example, the Yaesu has got 2 different levels of preamplifier that you can put in to boost up a quiet signal. So it's a big area, and it's probably not an area that I've got a lot of knowledge about, so I'm not going to go too much onto receiver filters and receiver features, but that's where your money's going. The higher end rigs, it's all in the receiver really, so being able to pick out those quiet stations, being able to be able to, if you're working a contest, you want to be able to talk to as many folks as you can, and if you can't hear certain stations and somebody else can, they're going to beat you in the contest. So if you're a contester, having a really quiet, a really sensitive receiver, a really selective receiver is very important. I think that's where the money goes in the higher end kit, and that's what I think a lot of my big box is full of, is components that relate to the receiver features of the radio. Another receiver feature is also some of the really high end rigs, and mine don't have this, but you can have some that have dual receivers. You can actually be listening to 2 frequencies at the same time, even on different bands. It's not something that for me that important, so I didn't buy a radio that had that, because that does add on to the price of the rig. It's quite a big price tag for having dual receivers, and for me, I'm more of a rag chewer, so actually having that feature for me wasn't that important. You can use split operations and things where you're working on the same frequency, and you know the other stations asking you to respond on a frequency slightly higher up the band. That's fine, but where you've got full dual receiver feature, I think it's a very useful feature if you're doing contests, but not particularly, wasn't something that was really important to me. Moving on to transmitter features. Now, I think most rigs that you buy now, most of the kind of HF radios certainly, typically come with 100 watts of RF power. You can put out 100 watts on the air. That's pretty normal. Now, some of the high-end ones can perhaps do more than that. I'm aware of some that can do 200 watts, and some can do 400 watts. People that tend to, I'm sure most people know, people that tend to want to run high-power wide-band amplifier, they'll plug their radio into a linear. So actually, the RF coming out of the rig doesn't really matter that much, because the linear is going to take care of. If you really want to run QRO, then a linear is what you need to have rather than running barefoot. But if you don't want to do that, you want to have an extra box in the shack, then you can buy a radio that's got more power. A couple hundred watts there are certain radios out there. Again, it tends to be the higher end radios that have that sort of output. Other features, a lot of radios now, in fact everything pretty much now on sale, I think, from what I've seen, has a built-in CW keyer. So if you're operating a paddle for sending out Morse codes, and you're relying on the radio to turn that into dits and dials, then that's kind of built in now, and I think most rigs have that. You can still buy external keys, and if you've got an older radio that doesn't have that, again, if that's the only thing that you need to do, the only additional feature that you're missing, well, you can buy an external key to do that. Some of the higher end rigs come with things like, for example, the rig that I've got has a parametric equalizer built in, so it actually lets you tune up, I guess, dial in the audio characteristics of your voice, so that you're coming out and you're able to be heard through the noise. So if you say trying to get through a pileup, having that feature, having been able to tweak the audio to get the really best out of your microphone, is a very useful feature. So that is something. But there aren't as many transmitter features, I find, in the higher end rigs than there are receiver features. Really, it's about the receiver. Other things that you might want to think about, and again, it all comes down to your requirements, are things like weight and size and power consumption. So it was quite interesting talking to Herick last year at the Friedrichshafen Ham Radio event. Herick from Ellercraft. I was chatting to him about their range of kit, and it was quite interesting. He was talking about, they have their K-line range, so the K3S, and they've got the matching amplifier, matching pan adapter, etc. And he was saying they've actually designed it that way. They are separate units, because A, they're lightweight, B, they'll fit into a suitcase, and C, they're designed for low power consumption. So what they're there for really is, what one of the markets are targeting are de-expeditions. So if you're someone that's going to go and do a de-expedition, you've got to think about, well, I've got to get this kit to my location. you don't. So, for example, my FTDX 3000 is 11 kilos. It's not a portable radio. It's not the sort of thing you're going to put in the back of the car and take off up a hill somewhere. It's not a SOTA radio. It's very much a base station shack radio. So, just other things to think about is that kind of weight and size and things. I guess other things that you might want to think about is, again, it all comes down to your requirements. What is it you want to use it for? What is it you've kind of, through your experience in the amateur radio hobby, what is it that now interests you? What is it that you kind of want to kind of move on with? It might be that it's contesting. That's not my particular, and I've not got any issues with it with the people that contest. It's not my particular interest, but if that's your interest, then you might be looking at rigs that are specifically designed for that or have those features. If you're a rag chewer like I am, or someone who's just I'm more of a casual operator, so I kind of just get on the air now and again and just put out a few calls or just respond to a few calls. Again, that might influence what it is that what it is you want to buy. It could be that you want to work certain bands or certain modes. For example, I know some of the Yaesu rigs now come with their fusion system built in. I know some of the Icon rigs come with D-Star built in. So if that's something that interests you, that might be a feature that might be important to you. You might be a SOTA operator. You might want something really lightweight. I know that we did Ed did a feature recently on the Chinese radio for doing SOTA. And his requirements there were all about how lightweight the thing is and that sort of thing. So that it's really you need to really list out. And when I looked at buying my second rig, when I looked to upgrade, I really had to think long and hard about what it was that I wanted that rig to be able to do. And you may also have a preference of manufacturer. I don't particularly do, but some people like Yaesu, some people like Icon, some people like Kenwood, some people like Elecraft or Alinco or Tentec. There are lots of manufacturers out there. And that's not all of them. It may be that you've got a preference. It may be you've only ever used Yaesu radios and you're used to their way of working. You're used to the terminology that they use. You do tend to find that across the range of radios that the manufacturer makes, there is certain commonality. So you might find it a lesser learning curve to move to a range of the manufacturer that you've used before. Now, I've used radios from all three, certainly Yaesu, Icon and Kenwood. I've had radios from all three of those manufacturers in the past, and I don't have a particular preference, but you might have that. They also, and one of the things that influenced me a little bit in this particular radio was that the dealer I bought it from, who isn't based very far away, I can drive there in sort of 25 minutes, is a Yaesu repair shop. They have a Yaesu authorised repair centre there, so if I did have a problem, then I'd be able to get that sorted out relatively quickly. So that was something that, to me, that was quite useful, and that may or may not influence you in your decision. But having said everything I've just said, there really isn't a reason to upgrade unless you do not feel pressure to replace your radio. You see the adverts, you see the shiny radios in the magazines, you see the fancy displays. But ultimately, when you're the person listening to your signal and listening to either your Morse or your voice or whatever data signal, they have no idea what radio you're running. It's a very, Martin always says it's a very levelling hobby. You could have a hillbilling £13,000 radio that has every possible bell and whistle on it, or you might have a second-hand radio that runs on valves that's 30 years old. The person listening to your signal has no idea which of those two you're running. So it's actually, it's up to you if you want to upgrade, and really don't feel pressured to do that. Ultimately, the basic features, you don't, all those things I talked about, operating conveniences there, and you don't need to have those. You don't need to have a built-in voice key, and that's not critical to be able to get. It's all about enjoying the hobby. It's not about having the very, very best radio that's out there. It's not about keeping it with it. Some people like to have, buy a radio every few years and make sure they're always up to date and got the very, very latest thing. And that's fine if they want to do that. But, don't feel pressured into buying the very latest radio that's out there. You just enjoy what you've got if that's what if that's what you want to do. Just a final thing. As you know, we on the podcast we're not sponsored. Nobody pays us to do this, so we don't have any kind of affiliation with any particular manufacturers or dealers. We're not forced to toe the party line. We're completely independent, and everything I talked about today, every radio that I've talked about, are things that I personally own. These are not things that I've been paid to talk about. It is the final one. If you do go out and buy a nice new radio, what I've done is I've got a cover I've got a cover for my radios, and just a little plug for DX Covers. And again, they're not paying me to say this, but just I bought a couple of covers from them for my 2 radios, which my radios are a couple of years old now. They're still looking pretty much mint condition, and the covers it's all down to the covers that I bought for them. Really, there's no dust on them. You can get a dust cover for them. So DX Covers, I bought mine at the newer Camfest in the UK here. Nice, very nicely made. They're kind of designed specifically for the particular radio that you got. They've got kind of a vinyl outer shell, and then inside is like kind of a felt inner, which kind of really keeps your radio in good condition. So I definitely, if you're thinking about buying a cover, they're a good one to consider. Okay, well that's it from me. Hopefully you found that useful, and if anybody disagrees or has got any other comments, please get in touch. Thank you very much.
As we approach the end of ICQ podcast episode 262, I'd like to make a few short announcements. I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH, Mr. Romanchik KB6NU, and Mr. Ed Durrant DD5LP for joining me on the News Roundtable. Thanks very much, guys. I enjoyed it, and I'm sure our listeners enjoyed your input and words of wisdom along the way. Don't forget, if you'd like to find out more about us, we have a website, www.icqpodcast.com, and we're also available on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, to name but a few, and I'm sure all the guys are as well. If you want to download some of the older podcasts and you're having trouble finding them, you need to use our RSS feed, which is available on our website, which is www.icqpodcast.com. And while you're up there, don't forget to sign up for Colin's newsletter. He sends it out about once a week. He'll let you know when we've released another program, and he'll also let you know once any other piece of information that are useful come out during the week. I'd like to thank Mr. Chris Howard M0TCH for his feature. Very informative, and you kind of got people thinking. I think it's a thought provoker, Chris, so a really, really good one on that one. So that was good. We are still also available on YouTube, and it seems quite strange that we publish an audio podcast to YouTube, but a few people find us that way, and if it's helpful to you to play it that way, then please feel free to. We are also available on various other media streams, including iHeartRadio, TuneIn Radio, and a few other, Spotify, to name but a few, as well as iTunes. I'd like to thank each and every one of our listeners for your downloads. We really, really do appreciate them, and I must admit, I say this every time, but we really do appreciate your support and your downloads, because it does make us feel warm and want to keep doing them, looking at the amount of downloads we get. I'd like to thank each and every one of our donors, our £1 a month donors, and the donors in the past that have made donations to help keep this podcast advert free. We don't try and sell you things, and we've heard from a number of you that that's one of the benefits. We don't try and make money out of this, so thanks very much for your support in assisting us. Well, all that's left for me to do now is make that lovely Mrs. B a cup of tea when she comes in from work. So I'm going off now, put the kettle on, make her a cup of tea, find her a chocolate biscuit, and don't forget, guys, we'll do it all again in a fortnight's time. 73 time.